Hello and welcome. This is Lisa Jones, and you are listening to the Exploring Death podcast. Hello and welcome. It's Lisa Jones with the Exploring Death podcast, and today I'm here with Bodhi Be, who owns the Death Store here in Maui, and I'm so excited to be talking to him. He's an amazing person and is all about death. And one of the first questions...
I'm not just all about death.
But one of the first questions I wanted to ask you was, how did you get interested in death?
How did I, I haven't been asked that question. How did I get interested in death? Well, if you're serious about being on a spiritual path and waking up, sooner or later you're gonna see that death awareness is one of the quickest ways to wake up. But it might have been I immersed myself in nature. I spent many years living in nature, very close to nature in a number of places, and nature itself has been probably the biggest teacher to me about death and about the interweaving of life and death, and in fact how they're so interwoven you can't really separate them. And then through spiritual practice and a spiritual life, I just see what a gift it is to have an awareness of my approaching death. Oftentimes I'll say to a whole group of people, how many of you know you're going to die and you don't know when? And everybody says, of course, and look at me like, what a silly question. But I find very few people actually live in that awareness as a truth more than something they know in their head. And it makes a huge difference. And I see that being in the midst of the world of caring for dying people and counseling dying people and their families and grieving people, how much it's changing my life, because I'm having more of an awareness of it just by being around it more.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's, as a lot of people know my story, that I was really thrust into it when my husband died when I was 37. And up until that point, I hadn't experienced death in my life. So it really, talk about waking you up, it really did. So
that could have been my answer to your question. When I was 17, the first real death I ever experienced was the sudden death of my father.
Oh, interesting.
And that totally, it was like that painting of the guy sticking his head out from one world, seeing the whole universe.
Wow, I've got chills as you say that. So it was a sudden
hit by a car.
Oh my goodness.
The police called and they show up at the door, and that was the first real experience I had with a person dying close to me.
Right.
Then my grandpa died a few years later, and unfortunately, I got to go over to my grandma's house and go get in bed with my dead grandpa. Mm-hmm. I was so curious as to what is this. Because my dad I only saw after he'd been embalmed at the funeral home, where he didn't really look like him, and I couldn't have gotten in the casket with him.
Right. Wow, amazing. So
here you could get in the casket with your dad.
Here you can?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's right. So you run a funeral home here on Maui.
Hawaii's only nonprofit funeral home.
Wow.
And only certified green funeral home.
Wow. So how did that come about? I'm just curious.
Well, that's kind of like one thing led to the next thing. I was doing spiritual counseling. I'm a Sufi minister, so I've been doing counseling for quite some time, and people started coming to me about death questions or grief questions or dying questions, and I didn't feel competent or skilled, and decided I would go take hospice volunteer training. That was transformative. Then they started calling me up and sending me into homes where people were dying. I'd never been in a home where somebody was actively dying, so I was in the school of how do people die? How do they do this? And having a business mind, having had a few businesses, I started looking around, what's going on, and I saw what hospitals are doing. Well, the whole hospital thing, even the whole hospice. I really looked into hospice and how much of hospice has gone for profit. Mm-hmm. And I looked at the funeral industry and the cemetery industry and the coffin making industry, which are all mega zillion dollar industries. And so I looked at that, and I saw the toxic practices, and I saw the institutionalized practices, and I also saw that in this culture, death is clearly seen as a medical and a psychological event. And as a minister and a person, you wouldn't have to be a minister to recognize that life is bigger than a medical and psychological event. And so I saw, well, there's a whole area that isn't even being touched.
Right.
So I thought, somehow that evolved into us creating a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Then now I had an umbrella for my counseling. Then I wanted to see how much caskets cost on Maui, and I saw that they were $1,500. The cheapest one was $1,500, and it was made out of particle board and toxic glue, and the whole thing came from China.
Oh my goodness.
And I thought I could make one of these pine boxes, the one the couple you see behind me. I could make them and sell them for $400 or $500. And so now I had a counseling practice, and I had caskets. And then I found out for very little work, I could become a funeral director in Hawaii. So I became a funeral director in Hawaii. I had a counseling practice. I had caskets. Now I needed an office.
Right.
So I thought, I'm going to go find me an office. I can do counseling sessions. I can showcase my caskets, and I can function. I can offer funeral director services. At the time, I went down to the funeral home we were talking about in town, and I said to him, I'm a funeral director, and he said, really? Does the state recognize you? Absolutely. Really? Yeah, absolutely. Do you have caskets? I do. Do you have urns? Well, no, I didn't have any urns, but I could have urns. And he said to me, you're competing with us. You're a funeral home. Goodbye. Which I thought was really short-sighted. I send all the people, since I don't have a crematory, I send all the people that call me up that want a cremation to the other crematory, and they get a discount for using my name now. Mm-hmm. So then I went home and I said, guess what, Layla? I have a funeral home. It was just like that. It was just like that. It was like, guess what? I have a funeral home. It was. And I thought right away, okay, I want to think about this. If I have a funeral home, well, most everybody has pretty lousy stories about going to the funeral home. Most people go to a funeral home and they're in shock and they're in grief. And, of course, terrible condition to make business decisions
Absolutely.
in. And so most people feel like, how did I end up spending that much money? And so I thought, well, okay, so I want to reinvent and revolutionize what the funeral home is. And also I want to make it more, in reinventing it, I want to make it more of an educational resource than just a place that's selling you stuff. I'm not here to sell you stuff. I'm really here to help, support, educate, and provide services. And yes, I have to charge for some of those because every funeral home has to have a price list. But I work with everybody, and I save people a lot of money, and I save people a lot of hoo-hoo. And I like to say, I don't prey upon you, I pray with and for you. Mm. So that's kind of and then of course, how did it become the death store? I don't know. It came to me, and hundreds of people have said, Bodhi, I love what you're doing, but you can't call it the death store. And they've told me some really, I mean, I couldn't look in the mirror if I called this the Till We Meet Again store.
Yeah, that would not be so good. Till we meet again.
But then I thought, we are so death-phobic in this culture. Grandma doesn't die, she passes away. I read the obituaries on my radio show. Everybody in the Maui news passes away, right? What is that about? I mean, the dog dies, the tree dies, the car dies, the phone dies, but grandma only passes away. And I thought, well, maybe I just need to go to the extreme and kind of hold the tent pole or the flagpole on the edge of the cultural conversation and just call it the death store.
Right.
So, I think if you're under 40, those people love the fact that I call it the death store, right?
Absolutely.
People that are older 40 are like, the death store? And of course, people that do come in here, they say, oh, I have friends who would never come here, right?
I know.
And we were talking about morbid, etc. And, but, every time I think about changing the name, oh, maybe I really ought to come back a little bit from the edge. I just go, no, it's the Death Store. Although one time I thought I'd rename it the D Word Store.
That's good. That's good. But I agree with you. I love the name, the Death Store, because it is what it is. I think that's one of the biggest issues that our society has with death is we don't want to talk about it. Don't say the D word.
The D word.
God forbid we say the D word. So like you said, we have passes away or,
Oh, we have 100 of them. Kick the bucket, bought the farm, over whatever. We have 100 of those.
So I love the fact
Even
that
the New Age ones, a change your address, transition, a graduate, go home.
right.
Go home, actually, I hear quite a bit, not just as a New Age thing, but going home is a very interesting thing because it's often, oh, good, grandma's going to go home now. And I think about that, and you think, well, I understand the essence of what that's referring to.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, there's something implied in going home, which is that we're not home now. And we're not home now kind of means we're homeless if we're not home now. We're kind of like orphaned, homeless people. Or we're tourists, right? So you think, does that have anything to do with why the planet is in the condition that it's in right now? Because we don't think that it's our home.
Right.
So there's a very deep implication in people are going home, that they're not home here.
Mm-hmm.
A very disturbing implication, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the whole idea of going home, as you said, I mean, is that really home there? Or, I mean, home is, it's a good question. Where is home?
It's a good question.
Are we home in who we are
It's a good question.
in this moment? Or
Yeah, it's a good question.
are we going somewhere? Great question.
Even home. What does that feel and look like?
Mm-hmm.
What does that feel like in your body? Like if you love going home to your house and you have this chair you love to go sit in
Mm-hmm.
and drink a cup of tea or whatever it is, that there's some feeling it illuminates in you about, oh, I'll get to be home.
Right.
Hopefully everybody has that. I know a lot of people in the world don't even have that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Too many people don't have that.
That's right. So I was looking around at your beautiful death store, and you've got so many things. And I was looking at the bringing awareness to how we care for our dead and just the environmental impact of funerals. And I would just love you to talk a little bit about that because it's astonishing.
It's shocking.
The facts that you have up there.
Over 180,000 gallons of toxic embalming fluid go into the earth every year. Enough metal to build a Golden Gate Bridge apparently goes into the ground every year, although that's so hard to fathom. Hundreds of tons of concrete, hundreds of tons of plastic, millions of board feet of trees going into the ground every year. The worst being not just the trees is horrible. Actually, they're all horrible. The embalming fluid actually contains formaldehyde. The active ingredient is a known carcinogen going into the ground. I think they've outlawed it in some countries in Europe because it gets in the groundwater. Turns out, though, cremation, most people are choosing cremation not because it's environmentally cleaner, it's because it's cheaper. In fact, most people don't know how toxic burning a body using propane or oil is to the atmosphere. All kinds of heavy metals and gases are released into the atmosphere. Super amount.
Yeah.
If that's neither one of those is a good plan, and green burial, conservation burial, makes the most sense. And most people don't know that. They want to be cremated because it's simple, it's cheap, and a lot of people who are environmentally conscious aren't aware of their last carbon or their last statement to the world is a really lousy carbon footprint.
Absolutely. And I was unaware of this myself. So talk about the green burial. What options are there to be more environmentally clean?
the simplest green burial is you get buried in a cardboard box or a simple wooden box, uh, uh, without a plastic or concrete grave liner, which is basically supposedly to protect your body longer and to make it so the ground doesn't sink, so it's easier for them to mow the grass. I mean, that's how.
That's the reason they put the concrete liners in.
That's the commercial cemetery, to make it,
Aesthetically
financially
pleasing. Yeah.
Well, to make it financially, they're paying less money towards mowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to have that nice rolling, even.
So to
land.
That's the simplest green burial: a simple wooden box or cardboard box.
And you'd have to find a funeral or
You'd have to find a cemetery. That would allow you to be buried without a concrete or plastic grave liner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some here on Maui.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's now the next step of what's happening with green burial, because the cemetery down here has a little section that is now their green burial section, because they're paying attention to what's happening with the baby boomers, who are a little more environmentally conscious, and so now they have a certified green section in their cemetery. The next step beyond that are cemeteries that are only green cemeteries. And the next step beyond that is a green cemetery that partners with a nature conservancy or a land trust, to where the cemetery becomes an economic means to help support and protect open space and land, which could be reforesting or just open greenways.
Amazing.
And then we have a plan for a step that's the leading edge out there, and we have a plan for actually taking that model and integrating public parks and public commons and picnic areas and dog park and community gathering places, really about integrating the living and the dead more, and also creating a place that is now multifunctional. It's not just for the dead, multifunctional, that is now protected in the commons forever.
Wow,
so
I love that.
That's the plan we're working on. So if anybody's listening to this or watching in, we're looking for land and funds to help manifest that here on Maui. And really, I think it would be a model for the world. Especially the step beyond that for us is to actually create a school and a house for dying people, a guest house for the dying.
Beautiful.
And in our school, one of the things we do in our School of Conscious Living and Dying is to train people to support the guest house for the dying.
Wow.
Be the caregivers, be the
it.
volunteers and staff.
Very nice. I've always wondered about cemeteries. I am amazed when I'm driving around really any place that I see so many cemeteries and so much land that takes up. And I mean, it's astonishing how much land we dedicate to the dead people. So.
My dad was buried in a cemetery in New York City that went on for, it looked like miles. All that land, and of course that's what's happening in Brooklyn now, is it's getting super gentrified and expensive, and there's tons of this land that nothing's going to ever happen with. And in fact, a lot of these big cemeteries are getting so filled up, they're starting to re-rent you. At some point, they want to put another body on top of your body.
Oh my goodness.
Or they want to remove your body, and I'm not sure what, maybe they put you on a shelf. And so there's different things going on in places like Hong Kong or big cities where these big cemeteries are full.
Wow, that's amazing.
So all this land, I think it's over 1 million acres, are taken out of the public domain in America, bigger than Maui.
Wow. And people are going to keep dying, so
looks like it. Yeah, I
it's
think
not
you
going to
said
go
it's
away.
a sure thing.
It's a sure thing.
One sure thing.
That's right. That's right. Well, one of the other things I want to talk about is that you have a death doula training program, which I actually had the opportunity to attend this past year, and it was probably one of the most transformative experiences of my life. And just finding out that, for example, that you can do a green burial, that you can have the body of your loved one in your home for 3 to 5 days or whatever.
Not only that you can, but that now you have the ability and the skill and and the knowledge to take care of that body.
Right, which I learned how to do that. And it was so empowering and so, as I said, transformative, because it took the experience of, for example, losing my mom, who died in a hospital, and we were shooed out of the room probably within 5 minutes of her death, and not being able to really fully integrate the experience of that grief in that moment. And to be able to now know that I can take a loved one and to fully grieve in that moment of it happening. Because I think a lot of times, for me at least, I've pushed the grief down and not been able to fully feel it. But when you've got the body there, you have more of an opportunity to feel that and to integrate it more fully into your life.
It's also, we're habituated to somebody dies, called a funeral home.
Right.
And we rarely have spent time around that, grandma dies. And yet there is so much richness in keeping grandma around for at least some hours, if not a day or two, to, first of all, you don't just die and then you're dead.
Right.
The heart might stop beating. Now they're finding out that there's still, as their machines get more subtle, they're finding that the brain is still active. Many religions say it takes days, sometimes a month, to fully leave. But certainly in some Buddhist traditions, they say it's like up to like 3 days.
Wow.
So to keep and I've helped people keep bodies at home for 3 days.
Interesting.
And it's absolutely it's a beautiful experience, not just for you, but for your kids and your friends and your people and your community, to be able to come and sit with that person and pray for that person, and pray with that person, and tell stories about that person. And I don't assume that person's not listening. Actually, the hearing's supposed to be one of the last things that goes.
Wow.
So I don't assume you can't talk to them. And actually, my dad's been dead for 40-something years. I still talk to him. So, but certainly to have the body there, and like you said, it helps you see that grieving is such a beautiful and healthy thing.
Absolutely. And it's bringing me right back to the moment of when my husband died, and I called the funeral home. It was 3:00 in the morning or something, and I was frantic because the children were staying at his mother's house, or my son was at his mom's house, my daughter was at her best friend's house that night, and I wanted them to see him and say goodbye. And the funeral director just said, well, it's better to take the body now so we don't upset the children.
Yeah, and their well-meaning and thinking they're sparing you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in retrospect, that's what I wanted. So my intuition was telling me to do that. And I wished I had had that knowledge. But as I said, your training, that's why it was so transformational, because I learned that I now have that power and that I can more fully grieve my loved ones when it's their time.
Wow!
So,
thanks for listening to that.
Whew. Maybe that's that needed to be said.
So you brought up the training.
Yes, I want you to. Yes, please tell us.
So we've done this 2 years in a row. We're about to do it next April, the 3rd International Death Doula Training. People from around the world have come to these trainings. Doctors, nurses, ministers, chaplains, hospice people, body workers and healers that want to bring their skills, people that work, counselors, psychologists, people that want to bring their skills now into being with dying have come. Lots of people that just want to know how to take care of mom when she gets older and is dying. People who are just really curious and want to educate themselves. I am so proud of the training that we do. We're bringing in another really great group of presenters, and we cover a very wide spectrum of not just practical skills, But this is soul work. To me, this is deep work to help shepherd people through the doorway. That it's much bigger than medical or psychological event.
Mm-hmm.
A medical event is the body's breaking apart. The psychological value is about the loss of the body, the experience of loss and the suffering of body breaking down. But there's so much more in the transition, especially in the soul moving on from this vehicle, this body at this time, and to participate in that, you need to be awake. To say it bluntly, you need to be as awake as you can be. I wouldn't say I'm awake, but I'm working at being more and more awake because that's what's being asked of me, to be and awake in a sense of being really deeply connected to what's way down inside my own being, my heart, mind, soul being, in terms of what's actually happening in the moment. Bigger than what my beliefs and concepts and ideas are, which usually just get in the way.
Right.
So some of the work we do at this training is really about it's life-changing training about how you are in your own being and who you are in life. And I think the training itself is much bigger than being with dying people. It's about how you live moment to moment.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. And that's been my biggest lesson in experiencing death, is how it woke me up to life. And I think this training is just, if you want to wake up to life and be more present and be more aware and really feel like you're living life to the fullest, this training is, there's nothing better. So,
we call it showing up for death, nourishing life.
Oh, beautiful. Well, we'll be sure to put a link on the website so people can check it out. And so let me do a reading for you.
Great.
And then we can wrap it up.
Okay, great.
This has been so fun. Let's see what the cards have to say.
I love it that you cried for us.
Oh, my goodness. Let's see. All right. So these cards, the first, I pulled 3 cards. Are there any lousy cards in this I don't think there's any lousy cards. They're all good. So it's all just a matter of the interpretation. But the first one is usually the blockage card. And so I love that it's awakening. That's the card that came up. And what I truly believe is that that's what you're helping people do, as we just talked about, waking up, right? Awakening people to more fully living life.
That is one of the threads that I weave in the work that I do, in the educational stuff I do. It's very much about shaking people out of this, what I sometimes call this hypnotic slumber so many of us tend to fall into in a culture that's happy for us to fall into. For sure. I completely agree with that. And so then the action card is essence, which is exactly what you're doing, is you're really getting to the core essence of what death is and how it, again, wakes us up to life. And, it's the lotus flower coming out of the mud. And that's, to me, what death, it's the shining the light on the death that brings the glory and the lightness and the more fulfillment to life that we have. Albert Einstein said, apparently, it's either all a miracle or none of it's a miracle. That's right. So what I love about that quote is it's a choice. Right. So then what I have found is, if I made the choice which I have, that it's all a miracle, it's more fun than if none of it's a miracle. That's right. So then the question is death part of the miracle? Absolutely. And I say absolutely. That's right. I say absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's great. And then the outcome card is radiance, which once again, it just goes right to the point of the more that you're in touch with death and the more you're okay with it and the more you can embrace it, and you see the heart just shining light out. I mean, that to me is the essence of what embracing death can do for you, is just be fully radiant in this lifetime. The Buddha said the greatest meditation of all is on death. Wow. Perfect. Well, thank you, Bodhi Be. That was great. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening to Exploring Death. And until next time, aloha. Come visit the Death Store on Maui.
Thank you for listening to the Exploring Death podcast. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Before you make any financial or legal decisions, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Exploring Death. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.